Good evening. Thank you for coming to our special budget meeting. It is 6:11. The meeting is now called to order.
Good evening. In accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 1046 et sec, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by advertising in the Star Ledger, El Nuevo Coqui newspapers, and by distribution to the administrative offices of the Newark Public Schools. A copy of the meeting notice was also forwarded to City Hall for posting. This is a special meeting, a budget meeting for Thursday night, November 5, 2015.
Please rise for the flag salute. Roll call.
Ms. Baskerville-Richardson? Ms. Carter?
Present.
Ms. Fonseca? Mr. Hassan? Mr. Jackson?
Present.
Mr. Lewis?
Present.
Mr. Rashidi?
Present.
Mr. Salinger?
Present.
Chair Perrello?
Presence.
Quorum is present, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we start, I just want to thank Ms. Principal Sylvia Esteves for hosting the budget meeting here. Ms. Esteves, can you please rise? Thank you very much once again. Next, we have our budget update.
How's that for a great start? Thanks very much for being here, and Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair. We are pleased to be here, members of the community, on a rainy night with tough traffic. We appreciate your commitment to being here. School Business Administrator Wilson and I will be providing a update of the budget situation in the district, and then we will all be obviously taking questions, discussing it, and hearing from members of the community. We're going to be doing that together. You see the general agenda, but let me start with this. There is we are in the midst of a challenging budget situation, but I think it's also important to recognize as we go into this that there are now, have been, and will continue to be deep investments in the future of the children of Newark. And let me just quickly, as a context setter, mention a few things that are going on to provide some context for the work. As you know, that we have just recently been recognized nationally as one of the top 10 districts in the nation for our work to integrate digital curriculum and content into the teaching and learning process. And we're very honored by that recognition. This board, I know, has been a part of that. But with 1,100 new Chromebooks and wireless access points in 3,700 schools, substantial expansion of bandwidth, 1,200 smart boards, and I think more importantly, the investment in some substantial digital software licenses to enhance learning and to aid our teachers. We're very, very proud of that. We have invested and continue to invest in curricular developments, about $12 million over the last few years, to acquire and to professionally develop our educators in such things as core knowledge, Singapore math, known as Math in Focus, and so on. I encourage you to look at our online portal that gives teachers and parents and administrators access to a broad array of instructional resources. It's really a rather impressive body of work that has been done to create Common Core aligned lesson plans and learning aids and interim assessments associated with the rigorous academic standards that we are so committed to and have been for so long. Adding student support team structures in all of our schools has been a very significant investment, $1.2 million alone in restorative practices training for our student support teams, which we are very pleased to be able to report have reduced suspensions by 37% We have hired community engagement specialists in every school and invested very substantially in training. While we all know that there's a long way to go, we're very pleased with the career and technical education programming, some of which is enumerated on the board here. And thanks to the tremendous efforts of Ms. Wilson to my left and her team, we now offer free breakfast and lunch in all of our schools. I had the great pleasure yesterday evening of being at the Bolden Center and to celebrate our after-school program. 7,000 students daily participate in programs both at the Bolden Center and at After School Excel in our K-8 schools, the Futures program, and everything from tutoring to robotics to television production. Snacks are provided in all of our schools. In fact, through the collective bargaining agreement we negotiated with our teachers, we have an extended school day, an extra hour of learning a day in more than 50% of the schools in the district. Our investment in the arts has also been deep. Every school has a certified arts teacher. Arts High School, I'm told, has 19. I also know that it's true that not every kind of art is represented in every school, but I'm very proud of the 180 or so certified art teachers that work in the schools and the substantial investment that we make centrally in the work. So I just want to offer that because sometimes there is a tendency to focus on the negatives and to generalize from the negatives and to view the positives as sort of sidelights. And I do, as I said yesterday in a state board meeting in Trenton, there is a great deal to honor and celebrate about the work that has happened over the course of the last several years, and with tremendous gratitude to this board for their support and contribution in so much of that work. So now let's turn to the topic of the budget itself. And I'm not controlling the device here, but you've got it. Okay, great. You've got it. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So let's start at a very high level. How much money do we have to spend every year collectively, this board and the Newark Public Schools? It's actually a somewhat elusive number. Because there are some substantial costs that are carried by the state, some pension costs, for example. But if you sort of exclude certain categories we have limited control over, we're just shy of $1 billion a year. About $846 million of that comes in a number of different appropriation streams, but think of it as the general fund, where there is relatively broad discretion about how to spend it. And the balance, about $122 million, comes from funds that are earmarked. And you're very familiar with these, parents and educators. These are Title I, IDEA, federal sources, and other funds that must be spent on a particular category of expenses. One of the storylines that is out there a great deal is that there's an awful lot of money that never gets to the schools because of a bloated central office, a bloated bureaucracy. And by the way, I think that is right and wrong. It is right in that I think it is a fact that our principals are given inadequate discretion over their funds. Too much of the direction about how to spend that money comes from the central office, and I often celebrate and rely on the autonomy of great leaders leading great schools. So that much is true. But the question of whether the money is spent before it gets to the schools, we can actually answer very concretely. If you look at the spending in the schools, and you look at it in at a very high level of detail, you will emerge quite confused, because many lines in our overall budget are identified on the central side of the ledger, but they actually cover expenses that occur at the schools. Custodians is an example. Certain instructional aides are an example. For one reason or another, to follow public accounting rules or to respect accounting traditions, they are identified as central costs. So we went through a process to disaggregate those costs and identify how much is spent at the school level and how much is spent at the central office level. And headline of that is, of this $968 million, just over 5% of our total budget, or about $50 million, is spent on central expenses. That is not a very large number compared to certainly some of the narrative out there, and certainly compared to the general expenses generally in any organization, whether it's a hospital, a large not-for-profit, a public institution. Revenues, central costs as a percentage of revenues is a ratio that one looks at, and that number is not particularly out of line. It's also a little bit heart-stopping because even if we were to zero out the central office, which would obviously be bad policy and not something I want to suggest anybody is considering, there's only a certain quantum of dollars that are actually available for continued refinement. Everything else is spent in the schools. So with that, we're going to sort of go back and forth, but let me pass the microphone over metaphorically to Ms. Wilson.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the community, board members. As the superintendent indicated, our general fund is made up of approximately $846 million. If you refer to this chart, you will see that a large portion of our aid comes from the state. Approximately 82% of our budget is made up of state and local funds. And those are made up of various forms of aid as categorized by the state. Every district gets something called equalization aid. Every district gets special education aid. These are all weighted formulas. We have security aid, transportation aid, adjustment aid, additional adjustment aid at times when the state has the funds available. We also saw a new form of aid in the last 2 years, which was our park readiness aid. We get approximately $400,000 of that. We got it last year, and we got it this year. And we have per pupil growth aid. As many of you know, the district is funded in New Jersey by a state funding formula, which is governed by the state. And this is the breakdown of aid that we receive. What also is included in that is our tax levy. Our tax levy in the city of Newark is approximately $116 million at this point in time. And the law caps us at being able to raise taxes at no more than 2% on an annual basis. And we have done that every year that has been possible. We also have tuition and something called Medicaid reimbursement. It's known as SEMI, Special Education Medicaid Initiative. And what that does is, for children who have disabilities or special needs, they do require other services, and the district is allowed to provide those services while they're in school and be able to get credit for those services. So it is a target set for us by the state, and I'm happy to say we've achieved that every year for the last several years. So that totals up our $846 million of general funds, which are basically funds that are available for use in whatever manner the district deems fit. Then we move on to what are known as our federal grants, as Superintendent Cerf talked about. And that's approximately $122 million of money. Early childhood is for our preschoolers, and that's approximately $88 million. Our IDEA, which is for students with disabilities, is about another $10 million. And our Title I, which is also Title I, Title II, Title III, and I think Title IV went away this year, is another $24 million. So that makes up 122. So we see what makes up the district's budget of $968 million that is available for spending. Sorry about that. Now that we've established our revenue, it's time to look at our expense side, because a budget's always made up of two sides, your revenue and your expenses. And the goal is to ensure that your revenue, hopefully, is sufficient to cover your expenses. The best you can hope for is to cover your expenses, but you definitely don't want to have less revenue than you have expense. Less revenue than you have expense. So the overwhelming majority of our general fund dollars go directly to support school services for Newark's children. Non-NPS payments. So we've categorized our charter school payments and our out-of-district tuition, which is approximately $273 million a year. $225 million of that goes to charter schools this year, the remainder being our out-of-district tuition for children who we do not have the programs to service. In our budgets, schools this year, and we have some 66 schools and approximately 32,000 students, were $312 million of that 968. Remember that number, 968. 312 went to schools. That doesn't mean that's all that schools got. We have other essential operations that occur because we have schools. So you've got employee benefits, which 90% of that is school-based, based on the number of staff we have. We have pupil transportation, which is another large area. The pupil transportation budget is approximately $28 million. No, I'm sorry, 32. So, you know, it's a large portion of our expenses. We have utilities, we have telephones, and we have rentals. There are some spaces we rent because we do not have sufficient space for our children to use. An example of that is at South 17th Street, where we rent a facility in the West Side Park that allows us to provide physical education on a daily basis. What we also have, so you see that of that total amount of money, which is about $125 million, 90% of it is school-based, with 10% being at the central office, or $12.5 million. In terms of discretionary operations, in terms of supplies, overtime, and supplemental pay being things like we have chaperones who get paid a stipend based on their union contract if they're at a dance. We have coaches who coach our athletic teams. We have academic coaches, so it's not all athletic or recreational. There are stipends for those kinds of activities that our teaching staff perform. We also have purchase services, the purchasing of professional development services, the purchasing of repair services. That's a broad category. And then we have equipment. So those discretionary operations actually add up to just about a little bit over $50 million, if my math is correct. 75% of that is, once again, school-based, with 25% being central. So let's talk about central budgeted salaries, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on slides 11 and 12, but for right now, our central office administration and school support staff. It is important that you remember that in the central office, there are custodial workers who are budgeted centrally. They're not physically in the central office, but they are budgeted centrally because that's the budgeting requirement in New Jersey. We have security officers, we have other staff that are school-facing and are directly placed in schools, but must be budgeted at the central office. That's what we call school support staff. That makes up another 70 million or so, and you can see that 55 million of it is school-based, or 69%, and 31% is central. Then we have essential administration. There are no public entities or private entities that do not at times incur litigation costs or legal costs. Education is a right for children, but there are many rights associated with our special ed population. There are many rights associated with our employees. So there is legal matters that we have to address, and that is in the area of judgments. And we do have a requirement to be audited annually based on the amount of federal funds we receive on an annual basis. Those two items add to 3 million. Once again, we add to the 846 million of general fund expense. So, centrally budgeted salaries, which includes our school-based roles. 80 million in centrally budgeted salaries covers approximately 1,224 NPS staff. Of that 1,224, 69% or 905 staff members are school-based roles. Once again, those positions that are budgeted centrally, paid for centrally, and in fact are serving schools. So we've listed for you with both the budgeted dollars and the FTEs, and FTEs means full-time equivalents, of the number of employees associated with that breakdown. So you can see that custodial services, for example, is 13.5 million, and there are approximately 297 employees who are school-based but are budgeted for centrally. So we see the total of some $55,396,000, or 69% of that 80 million. Remember, 69% for school-facing, school-based staff. Now we're going to talk a little bit about central office, what is truly central, where we talk about the central administration, and we see that there are 307 FTEs associated with that, and it's at a cost of about $24 million. So to help help the audience understand what the breakdown of school-based roles and central office roles are, we've sort of grouped them together for you by department and by the number of FTEs and the salary costs for each of those. I will point you to the highlighted ones. For example, custodial services. There's that 13,297 FTEs that I just spoke about. Look at special education. We have something called CSTs, Child Study Teams. They are budgeted centrally, but they are based in schools and provide services to schools. These are the people like the psychologist, the speech therapist, the social worker, other people like that who categorize or classify, our children. And that's a $19 million expense with 215 people. We have our trades. In Newark, we have electricians, we have masons, we have one or two glazers, we have plumbers. We do have 66 current buildings that we are operating. We operate some almost 6.5 to 7 million square feet of space. We also have buildings that average 82 years old. Our oldest building and the oldest in the state is Lafayette Street School, I think was built in 1839, if I remember correctly. So we need these people to help us service our buildings, and there are 110 of them at 8.6 million. So if you take those three bolded areas, you see how much of that is once again that school-facing piece that we talk about, and the instructional piece, which is at the bottom of the left-hand column, just above labor relations. So, there's always been this sort of conversation out there that talks about central office costs, and if we eliminated the central office costs, we could balance the budget. So we thought that it's a question the board has asked, it's a question we've heard from the community, and we thought it would be a good idea to truly show you what the central office costs of our administrators are and how that works. So central office costs in reality are 50.6 million, or 5.2% of our total budget. And if you look at our central office expenses, salaries for central office, the ones we went through, where we talked about custodial, we talked about all those other types of people that are included, is $24.9 million. Our essential operations within central office are 12.5, and our discretionary operations are 13.2. That is how we arrive at the 50.6. One of the other things we wanted to do was to compare what our central office executive team has looked like through the administration of several of our prior and current superintendents. So in 2008, we see that Dr. Marion Bolden, in her administration, there were approximately 23 executive staff for a total cost of $3.5 million. When Dr. Clifford Janey came on board, he had 22 executive staff members for a cost of $3.5. Cammie Anderson, our latest former superintendent, had 17 executive staff members for a cost of $2.9 million, and currently Superintendent Cerf has 17 executive staff members for a cost of $2.7 million. So we see that if we look at central office salaries as a portion of the budget, it is 11.1% of the budget. If we look at totally it as a percentage of totally budgeted salaries, it's 3.5. And if we look at it as a portion of our total NPS salary, our total NPS budget, it is 0.3%. 0.3.
So quickly, let me elaborate a little bit about the budget situation as it existed effective on July 1st. Essentially, we discovered that the budget was on track to have a rather substantial shortfall. And that shortfall we valued at approximately $63 million, a little bit more than $63 million. I want to quickly add that the budgeting process this year and every year is dynamic, that it is not at all unusual to go into a budget year knowing there's a lot of work to tighten up expenses and to manage costs. Even with that said, this was a number that was substantially larger than certainly many of us had expected to find at that late date in the process. So we went about the business of trying to diagnose the source of that and to fix it. And we were guided by one central premise that was the value that was at the heart of all the work that this team and many of the folks who are on the team who are out there tonight did, which is that our first priority was to assure that we would touch the schools themselves as little as possible. Let me say that again. Our first priority was to manage this budgetary gap as much as possible without reducing the costs that are naturally and appropriately incurred at the school level. When we tried to get to the bottom of where the actual shortfalls derived from, where they were from, we essentially said everything could be put into three large buckets. One, as you know, that for a variety of reasons that we need not go into tonight, there were a substantial number of teachers who were in what's known as the Educators Without Placement pool, the EWP Educators Without Placement. That number had grown, I would say, substantially beyond expectations to about $20.5 million. Secondly, there had been, based on prior trends, anticipated levels of retirements and resignations, and these projections were not realized. There was simply a budget projection that I think was fact-based, based on historical trends. That did not come to pass, and then there's a very small amount of what are prior year accruals that we underestimated, a small piece of the problem. Those were the essential contributors to that $63 million gap. But there are larger issues that lurk in the background that impose a fair amount of pressure on our overall budget situation, and let me mention a few of them. And let me quickly preface this by saying We are early in analysis. These numbers have not yet settled, and there remains some substantial disagreement about some of the core financial assumptions that go into some of these numbers. But based on what we know today, based on validated documents and audited documents, we know that a fundamental issue, and one, frankly, that has not been talked about nearly enough in the public discussion, is that over the past several years, the total student enrollment has increased in Newark, while state aid has remained flat. And that results, as the little math problem on the board demonstrates, in a reduced per pupil funding. So let me explain exactly what has happened. Over the last several years, the legislative process, the annual budgetary cycle in Trenton, has essentially gone like this, is whatever a district got last year, we're going to send the same amount again. That was true in Newark, that was true in all 560 districts across the state, with only some relatively modest exceptions to that. Think of that as sort of flatlined budgeting. If you got $1 billion last year, you get $1 billion this year. If you track the number of students that this district has submitted to the state and the state has validated, you will see that the total number of students who are being funded by that state aid has gone up. The slide says by around 4,000. That's what the data shows. We're still getting to the bottom of that issue. So when you actually do that, the amount per pupil, which is simply state aid divided by the number of students, necessarily and mechanically goes down. So schools have less per pupil to spend on education. A second contributor to this is that all costs can be divided into fixed costs and variable costs. Variable costs are things that you manage in a way that corresponds to real-time circumstances. For example, a classic example of a fixed cost are the electric bill in central headquarters. Whether you have 1 student or 1,000 students, you're always going to have an electric bill. You're always going to have one superintendent, for example. A variable cost is something that everyone who budgets at home is very familiar with. If I don't use my electricity, because I'm traveling for a long time, I will see my electric costs go down when I get that monthly bill from PS&G. I think the relationship between fixed and variable costs in the budget makes it very hard to be nimble and adjust to evolving circumstances. The third is an artifact of the rather peculiar budgeting process in Trenton last year. In order to prevent charter schools from taking a truly catastrophic reduction in per pupil costs, which would have been in the neighborhood of 15 to 18%, some people say as high as $23 million, as high as 23%. While trying to avoid that kind of catastrophic reduction, the formula was adjusted at the last minute to make sure that that districts per pupils only went down very slightly, and charters went down substantially more than that, but not that full 20%. So because of the flat line year-on-year, $1 billion last year, $1 billion year budget, the combination, the intersection of those two forces caused everybody to go down on a per pupil basis. Over the last July, August, September, October, four months, we have been hard at work trying to address the budget gap. I am very pleased to report that we have made great progress. Total reductions to date are roughly $50 million, a little bit more than that. We have a substantial and clear and explicit set of plans that should bring that number down to, I would say, more in the nature of $10 million, and we are engaged in an analytic process that should bring that number down further. I will tell you that I am confident as superintendent in reporting that we will end the year in balance. I am engaged in conversations and from multiple sources both on the expense side, but also on the additional revenue side. And I do not want to suggest that there is a cause for alarm, but there is a great deal of work, and there is some what we call executional risk in closing the budget gap. It requires a lot of day-to-day management of expenses. Again, to date, of that $50 million, we didn't do this in any detail, but of that $50 million, we can go on page 18, only $2.1 million came from the schools. And again, this was covered a little bit in the press, but essentially what happened is while we were analyzing our options, I directed our networks and our assistant superintendents to see if they could find $5 million in expense reductions at the school level. They worked individually with principals and leadership teams in schools, came back with a list and said if we had to do it, this is what we would do. We then all looked at that list and said, we're just not going to do that. We're just not going to do that. And we struck from the list almost 3/5 of that amount of money. So we don't know how we're going to answer this need, but we're not going to do it by making reductions in those lines. So that process that was asked to explore the possibility of $5 million in reductions ended up at about $2.1 million in reductions. The great majority of it was not by by eliminating a budget line, but by reducing a non-salaried supply line. If a school had $150,000 for non-salary supplies in a particular area, we would reduce it to $125,000. And all those little splinters added up to $2.1 million. I'm not suggesting that was done with a lack of pain or sacrifice, but I'm saying that that was the process that we went through. And I'll turn it back over to Val to talk about some of the work that is underway to manage this.
Thanks, Chris. As the superintendent indicated, since July, we've cut approximately $50.5 million of that $63.4 million gap. That has not been an easy task. It has required efforts on the part of multiple departments. It has required a team to look at things, and it is an ongoing process. So in order to get to where we are today, we employed a number of strategies. The first one we did was to develop a budget review committee that meets on a weekly basis to review the status of our account lines. It's made up of leadership team members, which include myself, several of our academic partners, our chief of talent, who controls a large portion of the budget with salaries, and we make recommendations to the superintendent on what things we want to do in reducing the gap. Superintendent Cerf talked about the $2.1 million that came out of schools. That was a significant and lengthy discussion that went on not just with the financial team, but with all of the district team. We included both our deputy superintendents serve on this committee and review all cuts in terms of what they may mean to schools and all strategies before we put them in place. This budget review committee will continue to work throughout the year and will continue to approve and control all future spending. That also means that we control hiring. So no longer is just the chief of talent and her team looking at hiring, but all of us who sit on the budget review committee are looking at that. If it is a clerk that needs to be hired, or it is an executive team member that needs to be hired, it comes before that budget review committee for discussion. There's discussion on what the salary is going to be. There's discussion on how much money do we have in the budget available. There's discussion on do we have a real viable candidate? Can we put this off or delay it? But what I want to also stress is that at no time, whether from July until now or going forward in the year, have we compromised the integrity of the classroom at schools. There are no schools or classrooms who have vacancies as a result of our having a budget gap. Hear me clearly. I didn't say they don't have vacancies. They don't have vacancies associated with our budget stress at this point in time. Their vacancies may exist because they have not found a viable candidate or because it's in a hard-to-fill area. So we have not compromised children having certified, professional, and competent teachers in every single classroom in this district. We've also had to control our non-salary spending, and that's been done significantly at the central office level. All of our non-salaried accounts are controlled by myself. I do not control them only by myself. Once again, the team has a conversation. We look at the expenditures that are being requested, and we ensure that schools are able to spend if it is something that is critically needed. Early on in the year, there was a large amount of conversation that went on about, oh, schools are at a 25% tolerance level. Yes, they are. But that 25% has not resulted in any school being unable to purchase services, equipment, or supplies when they needed to. They may have delayed purchasing for a week or whatever, but there is an approval process where a request is made to their deputy superintendent, who approves it, and then it's passed on to me. This is a way for us to restrain spending, not cutting budgets, but restrain spending so that when people get ready to make a purchase, just like when you purchase a refrigerator or a car, you don't purchase it on impulse. You think about it, you reflect on it. So if it is critical and you need it at this point in time, schools have been allowed to make those purchases. Central office has somewhat been held to a higher standard. Their expenditures are more significantly monitored, but their accounts are also at that 25% tolerance level. So it's not schools can't spend, central office can't spend. We need to consider what we are purchasing. Can we delay it? Can we postpone it, if necessary? But if it is critical to safety, health, and instruction, it is going to go forward at the cost of something else. Additionally, the superintendent has been out on a speaking tour, advocating for the district, looking for additional federal, state, and local monies, and philanthropic monies to see how we can help us to relieve the stress on the general fund budget. And we are engaged with several third-party experts in supporting our budget planning process for the long term. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a problem of 1 year. It is going to be a multi-year problem if we continue to have flat funding. Continued flat funding is going to eventually, it's not going to be just Newark. You will hear other districts begin to have this conversation. So we've got to start looking not just at our budget as a single year, we've got to look a multi-year budget and be prepared to meet whatever challenges we have coming forth while maintaining our operations and making sure that we can put new initiatives in place that ultimately will drive student achievement. So now we have some personnel updates. I'll hand it back over to the soup.
Oh, okay, well, I meant to thank...
Oh, I'm sorry, I can do it.
It's okay, I got this one,
thought you
okay.
said yes.
There were, we talked before about the Educator Without Placement folks, when in July 1st, there were about 429 individuals, and let me be clear, these were individuals who did not have a specific assignment to a specific school, but to whom we had appropriately a contractual obligation as a district. That number has been reduced dramatically. That number is now down to about, I bet you this data is old, I bet you it's lower than this, but it's about 164 individuals. But let me be clear who those individuals are. These are individuals, many of which are certified in an instructional area of expertise for which there is not a vacancy. That's one substantial category. And the second substantial category is of individuals who are the subject of an investigation or a specific tenure charge, and for one reason or another, we have considered not appropriate for placement in the schools. Let me be clear, though, that that while this resulted in a net savings of $25 million, and let me be also clear that many of these educators were excellent educators who found themselves in the EWPS pool for circumstances that had absolutely nothing to do with their competence or their effectiveness. It is nonetheless true that all of these individuals were individuals for whom there had not been a match between the desire of a principal and the hiring committee of a school and the individual looking for a job, and we were forced at the end of the process to, in the language of this business, forced to force place individuals into schools and to limit the ability of schools to hire externally. By that, it means to look to hire teachers from outside of the pool, whether there was a great teacher to be recruited from an adjoining city or elsewhere. That to me, as a policy matter, is disappointing. It is also entirely understandable from a budgetary perspective, but it is disappointing because, as I was asked in a prior meeting, there were a handful of teachers who were rated ineffective through the evaluation process, who were force-placed into schools. But the net of it, from a budgetary point of view, was that was about half of the savings we've been able to realize. I'll give this back to you.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what's happened in terms of what we've done in terms of staffing as part of this update. So last spring, excuse me, during the budget process, there were approximately 84 positions that were submitted by schools and locations for either a cut, a layoff, or a reclassification. And that breaks down into 64 positions identified by principals with autonomy at the school level and 20 positions identified at the central office. In addition, we had some 141 vacant positions that were cut. 113 of these were at the school level and 28 were at the central office. So when we talk about budget and we talk about cuts and we talk about vacancies, let's talk about before July 1st, which is the data I just shared with you and is the data on the top half of the slide. After July 1st, in the fall of 2015, we have actually cut an 86 additional vacant positions. These were positions that, and you will see that that is in the central office. There are no cuts that were made in terms of staffing at school level. These were positions that central office administrators had planned for in a budget that, because of the gap, could not support those positions and had to make critical decisions to decide that for this year, in the interest of ensuring integrity in classrooms, we will go without. So 86 positions since July 1st, or vacancies rather, have been cut at the central office. So as with any school district, time marches on. You've got to continue to do new things regardless of the fact of whether you have sufficient dollars or not, and you've got to look at reallocation of your funds. So in terms of new school operation titles, from 2014 to present, we've added 121 new staff positions have been created over the past 2 years to better support school operations. These positions are in primarily 4 categories. We have what's known as the community engagement specialists. 49 of these positions were created. There's approximately 1 for every single school. It is to foster, that position is to foster community engagement, parental engagement, and involvement. Many of you know them as probably formerly parent liaisons. That position was abolished and this new expanded position was created, with many of our former parent liaisons qualifying and being able to step up into this enhanced position. We have 3 data analysts that we have hired. Some schools had data analysts prior to 2014, and some schools have used some creative budgeting in terms of how they allocate their staff to do their data analysis. We have also created the position of school operations assistant. There were 41 of those titles created. This was to provide support for schools on a clerical, administrative, and business function, which would then give our instructional leaders more time on task in the classroom, evaluating staff, ensuring that certificated staff are performing the tasks that they need to. And we created 28 school operations managers to manage some of these assistants and some of the tasks within schools. So for a total of 121 positions over the last 2 years. Okay, so in addition, from July to October of 2015, we have promoted some staff. We have been able to promote 23 teachers to a teacher coach level, master teacher, someone who can help other teachers with their instruction to help them improve their ability to reach and to teach children. We have promoted 6 teachers to the vice principal level. We've promoted 2 of our teacher coaches to the vice principal level. And we have promoted 7 of our chief innovation officers. That's a title we created a couple of years back to help ensure the infusion of technology, to look at innovative strategies that could be used in schools to improve instruction. 7 of those candidates have been promoted to the vice principal or principal level. And this slide, I'm going to let the superintendent, well, not let, I will invite the superintendent to present it
I'll go
since
with
it's
let.
his favorite.
So one of the things we wanted to get to the bottom of is what is the aggregate impact of the last couple of years of budgeting on the adult to child ratio in schools. And we, with a lot of help from a lot of analysts, have been able to generate the following information, which I think is very interesting and in some respects very encouraging. So let me start at the top, and I don't know whether this is, I hope it's something you all can read out there. Let's just go a year-to-year comparison. Last October 2014 to October 2015. If you look at the total number of staff members, adults, if you will, we are actually modestly down from about 5,640 total staff members down, what looks like about 125, down to 5,517. That is the, and if you look at that in ratios and you compare it to our number of teachers, if you go 4 lines down with me, please, to the ratio of students to NPS staff. So you'll see that there were 6.4 students we serve to every single adult in the district. And if you look at it on a year-to-year basis, it's essentially unchanged. There's now 6.6 students to every employed adult. That's the ratio. Now, if you look at certified instructional teachers, instructional staff, and by that I do mean certified teachers, you'll see that that number is also down. It was on October of 2014, 2,863. It has dropped about 100 to about 2,765. So if you look at the ratio of students to total teachers, you'll see that the ratio has gone up a little bit from, again, if you look at the 3 lines from the bottom, 12.7 to 1 to 13.1 to 1. Not enormously, but measurably, it has gone up to 13.1 students for every certified teachers. But what's really interesting is the line that's in bold, where it says school-based teachers. That is, teachers who are housed in schools and providing either direct instruction or direct training of other teachers in that particular building. You'll see that that number has actually gone up from 2,645 to 2,730, an increase of just under 100. It looks like about 85 or so. And I think encouragingly, 2 lines from the bottom, 13.7 students per school-based teachers, per 1 school-based teacher, down to about 13.3 per school-based teachers. And then lastly, and very quickly, if you look at teacher coaches and academic interventionists, that number is modestly up between these 2 years. So that provides a little bit of an overview of our budget situation, past, present, and future. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Cerf. Now the floor is now open for discussion. Any board members have a question? Mr. Jackson?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Mic check. All right, there we go. So, before I actually begin, we're asking questions about the side that we're on now, correct?
No, you can ask any question on it in the presentation.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I need to go back a little bit, and forgive me because I need to find out.
Take your time, and would you tell us the page number, please, when you find it?
Page 14. For one, let's start off here. And pardon me because I'm just going to speak honest. I don't have the best knowledge, so to say, on how to set up a slide like this. But I'm thinking this slide is very vague in terms of explaining or trying to address the point of making a point if there is any. Going back to 2008, we have Marion Bowden, Superintendent, Central Office Executive Staff, 23, and cost $3.5 million, let's just say, to be on the safe side. For one, my question would be, what was the district's population during that time? 2, at that point, what did those superintendents consider executive staff? Because that can tell us a different number. Because, quite frankly, let's just go with Superintendent Anderson. She can consider a few people executive staff, like you have your chief of staff, then you have your executive superintendents, but you don't have your department heads, like Department of Personnel, Department of Finance, yada, 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 such and forth. So what would be considered executive, central office executive staff between these superintendents? Sure. And also, it says budgeted. Now, I can take that 2 ways. It was budgeted for $3.5 million, or let's say with Ms. Anderson, it was budgeted for $2.9 million, but we actually spent $4 million. So when we have a slide that says budgeted, what was actually spent? So maybe I'm misunderstanding budgeted and cost.
Okay. Is that the end?
That was the end for that slide.
All right. So I think you asked 3 or 4 questions, so let me make sure I try to answer them all. First of all, the easiest one and the last one was whether or not budgeted meant cost. In this case, budgeted meant what the actual cost was. Because not that we budgeted X dollars and we spent Y. This is truly the budgeted amount and therefore the expensed amount in the historical years of 8, 10, and 15. So you also asked what was considered executive staff and what were the differences. The executive team, when we actually located documents, contact lists that indicated the different makeup of teams at the time, and we compared them position for position. Very few differences were found. So in terms of Dr. Janey and Ms. Bolden, at that time we had an assistant BA or at one point 2 assistants. Today I don't have one. So that's one difference. But the differences were not material in nature. It was whether we had a communications person included as part of the executive team or not. It was not large differences, so it wasn't, that we had this. The deputy superintendents and assistant superintendents were always included in all superintendents' staffing. Did I miss any of those questions on that slide?
Not per se,
Okay.
and also, Ms. Carter wants to ask a question.
I have a question on the same slide. So during executive session, this is the slide that was presented, and I wanted it to be on the record that, one, the chief of staff is not included in this number of 17, as well as it was said that this would be a reflection when presented to the public that there is someone that is due to be added to this budget, as well as there's someone getting a promotion, which means that this number will go up. But this is the same number that was presented without those 2 or 3 people added.
Okay. We did talk about the fact that these things had not occurred. Our chief of staff, interim chief of staff at this point, is funded by an external source. So that's not included in terms of, back to the question of budgeted and cost. And there is a pending promotion for an individual. I think he might be included.
That's not included, because this number is the same number.
All right.
There is, and you do have the backup sheet, which I'm happy to pull out of the files here in a moment. But there is one unfilled position that is included in the number, in the $2.7 million number.
According
In other words, it's budgeted, but that's my
Robert.
recollection. That's the
Assist-
chief external.
The chief external officer?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and just
And
another,
that has not been, that
not
person
been
has
filled.
not been hired yet.
has the promotion that was also on the document that we received, so this number is going to go up both in terms of the cost and the amount of people, because they're not included in this, because this is the same number that was presented in executive session.
Yes, and let me be clear that the promotion is of an internal candidate, so it's not an
No, I'm clear of that. I'm
I
just
know,
saying that
I
the
know,
cost
let me-
is going to increase.
Yes, but let me explain the increase in costs. The promotion is an internal candidate, so it's not a full FTE in value, and the other position has not been filled. Neither of those two have been activated at this point in time.
and just a question that I raised before, what was the district's population in terms of students?
In terms
During
of
those years.
students, in 2008, I would say we had probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 39,000 in district students, right? So when I talk to you about students and I talk about district students, I'm not including charters in that number. Currently, we're at about 32,000,
No, it's a little higher
a
than that.
little higher?
It's closer to 30, I believe it's closer to 34 or 35,000.
Okay. And we've just gotten enrollment counts, so we haven't
So-
finalized them.
So so what I would suggest, and I guess we can do this collectively as a board, is to do a little bit of a better research in terms of the actual number of students. Not to say that that number isn't correct. My understanding of the number back in 2008 would have been in the 40,000 range.
Including, you have to remember, when we talk about district students, there's something called resident enrollment,
Right.
which includes our charters, and then there's district enrollment.
Right.
So the the 40,000 number is a number that includes all children who reside in Newark. But when we talk about our budget, once we've paid the charter payment, all funds go to the district students in district schools.
Okay.
And let me just add one modest amendment to this. There are a number of students with special needs who have out-of-district placements that count in the student total, that are in sometimes in a day program, sometimes in a private school, sometimes being served in another district.
Ms. Baskerville Richardson, do you have a question?
So I just have well, two questions. This isn't even a question. I would just like to suggest, and I think for further discussion in committee and by the board, since we have local control in the area of finance, I think that we have to stop the practice of external funding for hires in the district, because it does not allow us to really know what the organizational structure is in the district and what the finances really are in the district. Okay, I have a real problem with the continuation of this practice of external funding for the salaries of people who are coming in and working in the district and therefore are not accountable in terms of anyone really being able to see, we have that word transparency, to really be able to see who these people are, what they're being paid, and even what their work is. And this sort of a situation allows for hirings that we as a board don't even get to see. And just the way that other monies flow through the district process, I just think that we have to talk about stopping this practice and make all monies that pay people that directly pay people who work directly in our district, that those monies come through the district. So that's really more of a comment, and I think something that we need to put on the table for further discussion.
Board Member Baskerville, let me reassure you that if an individual is hired by the district and is on permanent assignment to the district, they are paid through the district's funds. And we do have a position budgeted for a chief of staff and are in the process of looking for a permanent chief of staff.
Thank you. I wasn't referring just to that one particular position, but I know that there are, be it personnel or, any variety of types of contracts and agreements where money flows through the district for the district and people are working on behalf of the district, but there is really no visible trail of this because it is paid by external funding. I don't know if this happens in other districts, but I think that it becomes problematic for this district, particularly since we have local control in the area of finance.
So let me just say I agree with you that that is an appropriate subject to look at all of those instances, and we'd be glad to share that. We'd be glad to share that with you.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, may I have
Yes.
one more question? Okay, so Superintendent Cerf, you spoke about the employees without placement pool, and I would like to say that that it is, I think, a wonderful thing financially, fiscally, that those people who could be returned to the classroom were returned to the classroom, because that is the creation of that, even though you don't want to say how it was created. We know it was created by the former superintendent. And so now, looking forward, are we able to say that that type of a pool, that employees without placement pool, other than people who, for whatever legal reasons, cannot or is best to be kept out of the classroom, can we say that that type of a pool is a thing of the past in this district, and the creation of any budgetary gap because of teachers without placement is a thing of the past in this district?
Well, first of all, just one point of clarification. This pool was created by the intersection of a law that is the law of the state in New Jersey and the operation of a collective bargaining agreement. It wasn't so much a creation of any single individual. So how can I answer that question? I will tell you that as a policymaker and as someone who is trying to find the right thing to do for students, it really is not something I would prefer to do, which is to force place teachers. I don't know how you hold a principal or a school accountable for academic results and tell them that it is their obligation to accept a teacher who they have made the judgment does not the right fit for the culture of achievement in that particular school. So I'm not an advocate of doing this, and I certainly can't make any broad assurances to you, but I am a realist. And I would say that in the budget situation we are in today, and in the budget situation that I can see down the future, I would be very, very, very surprised if the EWPS pool ever achieved the numbers that it has in the past.
I'm sorry, you said if it ever achieved the numbers that it has in the past, but the question is it a thing of the past, or are we looking at the possibility of the creation of another EW?
Well, we will always have
Pool.
an EWPS pool. We have about 164, at least last time I got a quantification of this. We have about 164 individuals. I do not anticipate that there will be an expansion of the pool and public funds spent to pay for individuals who do not have an assignment in the school. I do not anticipate that.
Thank
Vice
you.
Chair Lewis?
So, Mr. Superintendent, right now our remaining budget gap is a 12.9 mil.
That's the one I am prepared to report today with confidence. I will tell you that there are very targeted efforts underway to bring that number down substantially from there.
So my question is, it's going to go back to hiring.
Mm-hmm.
Are we still doing hiring in the district as of now with this gap?
Yes. Yes.
Do you feel as though it's good practice to still hire folks when we in a deficit like this, and we're telling schools to freeze their budgets, but we at central office are doing hiring in central office?
So let me clear up a little confusion that we may have sowed. So we have not told schools to freeze their budgets. They're actively, for example, as we discussed at the last board meeting, I was advised that we needed to hire an additional cadre of special education teachers. We have almost closed that process to bring those people into the schools, and nor have we frozen the budgets at the school level. As Ms. Wilson suggested, that what we have put in place is a series of controls so that the execution of a budgeted purchase, for example, for a non-salaried supply, is something that does not happen without the review of the network and ultimately of the school business administrator. To assure that that happens, I have given very clear and explicit direction that in the event a school has a budgeted line, it's appropriate to have controls. It may be unpleasant and difficult, but it's appropriate to have controls. It is not appropriate to freeze the schools on those lines. And therefore, every time an application comes our way to release funds for a budgeted line, after appropriate scrutiny and sometimes discussion, it is released. So in terms of Central, I can assure you that the number of staff members at Central, in 2 Cedar Street specifically, whether or not there's a formal hiring freeze, effectively we are operating like that. We have far fewer individuals now than we did before. And we are not in the process of filling anything other than critical and essential positions. Ms. Wilson?
Mr. Lewis, well, the superintendent has indicated that we are controlling hiring at the central office level. Once again, I want to reiterate that there are no budget cuts at schools other than the 2.1 million that you see, I think, on this slide. All of the other cuts have come at the central office level. Now, what it is critical to remember, as I said, time goes on. School district has to perform its function and it has to perform its operations. So where there are critical needs, there may be individual hires that occur at the central office, but I can tell you it is not whole-scale hiring. And several of my colleagues in this auditorium and some sitting on the dais will be happy to share with you the stress they're feeling because their offices may not have a clerical support person. I am running a $1 billion budget. I do not have an assistant BA.
Madam, I'm sorry.
Mr. Lewis, let him wrap up, and then Mr. Jackson.
And then me, please.
Yes.
So let's go back to B14. So with your superintendent, you said you have 17 people on your staff as of right now, executive staff. There wasn't no movement, growth, no one hired on the executive staff level?
The net number is, I mean, there may have been additions, there may have been subtractions. Some people retired, left the district, and those positions were filled. But the net number, I believe it's right to say, has been constant since I've got here.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Madam Chair, thank you. Comment and a question. And, pardon me, but, Mr. Cerf, I think we have something in common. I'm a realist as well. And let's be real. The fact of the matter is that the previous superintendent and company have left this district in financial shambles. And now we are scrambling to try to save this district financially. It is atrocious what we are doing. And, I just find it very hard to sit up here, go along with the motions, tap along, dance along with these numbers, knowing what the real impact is on schools. We are at a very critical time here in North Public Schools, and this makes absolutely no sense. So, after that comment, looking at page 12, with school-based roles in central office, I'm sorry, excuse me, that's not the title of the slide. That would be salaries by department. I'm looking at some of the departments here. I'm looking at the call center budgeted for $327,000. I'm looking at human resources budgeted for $1.5 million. Labor relations, $447,000. Ombudsman, $185,000. Talent office, $1.1 million. Just to name a few departments that I had spotted out here. My question would be, again, budgeted, and not to get confused, is this the actual amount that was spent in these offices? And if so, I've asked this question several times, and I still haven't gotten clarity as to what these offices, why can't these offices become combined in terms of human resources, labor relations, and talent?
Okay. So, first of all, let me answer yes. These are the budgeted salaries for these offices, and they amount to the FTEs that you see there. So this is current data from our system.
So that means that this is the actual money spent. Okay.
Right, it would be, of course, that's going to be the annual, it's not money spent in this case, this is the annual cost. So in the Office of Fixed Assets, there are 3 FTEs for a cost of $153,000. That is the salary for those 3 people, okay?
Okay.
So the second part of your question is, what is the role of human resources, talent, and labor relations, and why would they not be combined? We have 8 unions. We have some 6,000 employees. I can't even begin to tell you how many titles we still have after we've done a number of reductions. And there are complexities in our union contracts. So in our labor relations department, we have 4 individuals. Those individuals are responsible for the negotiation of contracts. They are also responsible for the discipline procedure. I will tell you that we have 2 hearing officers who are, let me finish, who are hired externally from external sources who work, I think it's right now 4 days a week doing hearings, right? And it's a full day of hearings. Those hearings consist of discipline for performance, discipline for attendance, and any other issues that may arise. So that's what the Labor Relations Unit does. In terms of human resources, I would say, and the 21 individuals that support that, they support the entire district. So I would say to you that human resources is a title that has existed for a number of years. We now see the title of talent also being used in the human resource area. But I would say that human resources is everything that happens to an individual after they are hired. So you take the employee from cradle to death in the industry. That's what we call it, when the employee separates from the district. So that includes their benefits, that includes leave of absences, that includes all processing that is involved with whether they get a promotion, whether they get a change in title, dealing with civil service, all of those things. Talent, on the other hand, is, as it is applied in other industries, it is the acquisition or hiring and recruitment of individuals. So those are three different functions and arms of what used to be known as just human resources.
So now, two things with that. That would be a total number of 35 employees between the three offices. And understanding labor relations, and it sounds like they have a pretty tight schedule and are probably overworked, as previous stated, in terms of having enough secretaries and actually enough hearing officers. So with in mind the proper qualifications and certifications, wouldn't it make sense to divvy up some of these offices and or merge talent and human resources and try to send additional personnel to labor relations to kind of offset the amount of the workload, so to speak, and to also add to the fact Mr. Lewis brought up, and I heard the comment about not enough secretaries and assistants in offices. I believe the board and the community brought up numerous issues with the layoffs of secretaries and support staff, most of whose salaries, when cut, didn't really save the district too much money. And we laid off secretaries and whatever have you, causing the workload to go up in these offices.
So the question I heard was, could we merge offices in the human resource area?
And
that's the
talent.
only question I heard.
Yes.
Okay,
And the last statement was just a statement.
that's what I just want to be sure.
Yes, ma'am.
So in terms of human resources, they are in fact merged. They report to one central leader, our chief of talent. So they are merged in the sense that they have different functions, right? So for example, in our benefits area, which is located in human resources, I think right now we have 4 or 5 people. They manage almost $130 million worth of benefits. They manage every time an employee wants to make a change. Let's say you've had a life-changing event. You're married, you're divorced, you've had a kid, you want to change your benefits. We just went through an open enrollment period. They also manage pension. There's a pension report that needs to be provided on a monthly basis that has to be reconciled. They manage, if you have dependents, they manage your insurance. They also manage things like that. So each of those individual segments within that 21 that you see, it's not as though it's 21 and there are overlapping functions. I want it to be clear that there are individualized functions that come together as a unit. And I do know that in terms, maybe not so much in labor, because you have to have certain certifications to deal with labor issues, but in the other areas where there is an ability to cross-train and to use staff across levels or across departments, I do know that's done.
Miss Wilson, I think you hit the nail right on the head, and I don't even have to go further. We're changing names of offices for people who don't have qualifications.
No, I didn't say that.
Well,
That's not what I said.
Now, I took that as such,
That was not what I said. Let me clarify what I said, because I want to be clear. What I said was that you require certain certifications in the area of labor. So you asked, you're looking around, you asked, could you move people from human resources into labor? That was my answer in terms of labor.
Ms. Wilson, it was human resources and talent.
Right, I said you cross-train and you use your staff.
Right.
At times, let's say we have a hiring spurt, right?
Okay, got you.
So, for example, I'll give you an example. We had an opportunity to ask for food service workers. We had 50 people that we expected to come down. Someone trying to be helpful put it out on Facebook. So on Friday morning, we got almost 300 people. That meant we wanted to ensure, we didn't want to turn the people away. We wanted to be able to share the information with them so they knew what was required if they were going to take a job with the district, knew what the costs were, knew that they had to get fingerprints. That required some of the people in various areas within HR to band together to provide those informational services and to provide those packets. So if you have a peak need at any given time, that is how you would use your staff effectively and efficiently. That was just an example.
Okay, I understand, and I think we're just gonna move on from that. And my last question, and then I'll be done for the night. I'm trying to find the actual slide where we had Chief Innovative Officer. Which slide was that on again? If someone
Yeah,
could be so kind.
I believe it's 24.
It was 24. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm kind of far back. Okay, thank you. Let's see. Here we go. So, and I'm pretty sure we went through this again, but again, just if you can indulge me, I apologize. What is a Chief Innovation Officer?
So first of all, one point of clarification, that the bottom line says is that, and actually I believe this is true, with one exception, all of the principals who are new to the position this year were internal hires. It says, most of them, by the way, were VPs, were vice principals, were moved from vice principal to principal. There was a small subset who previously served the role of Chief Innovation Officer. As I understand it, that is a school-based advisor on digital curriculum and helping teachers become comfortable with and effectively use digital technology in their pedagogy.
Okay, so that would be a vice principal?
No, I'm sorry, the slide may be a little bit unclear. So these are individuals who are new to their posts since I arrived in July. Of those individuals, 7 of them currently hold the position of principal. This says that those individuals were internal promotions from either the role of Chief Innovation Officer or vice principal. The great majority, I believe I'm correct, were vice principals.
So now, okay, so I'm still confused. Chief Innovation Officer. Let's go with traditional. We like to use that word, traditional. Traditionally, what would that title be called?
I hear vice principal out in the audience, but I don't necessarily agree with that.
Can I?
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
I was, but I just want to clarify. When I was in high school, 2006 to 2010, Malcolm X Shabazz High School, what would have been the name of that title for that person?
I doubt that title would have existed in that era.
Okay.
Well, it exists today because we put 11,000 Chromebooks in and 3,200 wireless hubs and 125 smart boards, and have invested in software licenses for everything from SmartAmp to Newsela to a variety of Google products to enable teachers to bring in instruction. And so many of our teachers are comfortable with technology, many are not. And so this is a role that is frankly a reflection of the evolution of instruction from the era where you went to high school, and certainly from the era when I went to high school, to the present. I actually would view that as a positive.
Right. So, just from what I remember, this would kind of coincide with a technology coordinator that we had. So now my next question would be, and then I'm completely finished. Is this Chief Innovation Officer, is this an affiliated position?
No, it is not.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Fonseca?
Thank you. Now, my question is totally on a different page. If you go to page 10, where it says expense details, so it says non-NPS schools get 273 million, and NPS schools receive 312 million. That's a difference of about 39 million. So my question with that is, how many children do we have in traditional Newark Public Schools, and how many do we have in charter schools, and how do we determine the amount that we allocate to both?
Right now, we have approximately 33,000 students in district schools as the latest data from NJ Smart, which is the district schools with the 312. There are some district students who go out of district, so I don't have a number on those. But the charters have approximately, I think it's about 12.
It's about 14,500 more or less.
Okay.
Okay.
And we don't choose how much is allocated. That is something that is determined by a funding formula from the state, so the district is a pass-through for those funds. And in terms of tuition in the out-of-district schools, we do not set that either. That is set by those schools, approved by the state, and if we have children receiving services, we need to pay the cost.
Okay, so while I agree that every child in this city should be educated, because I'm a mom, and I think that being educated is, it lays the foundation for you to be successful, but I find it quite hard to understand how we have 33,000 students in public schools, like the Newark Public Schools, and 14,000 in the charter schools, and there's such a big gap as to what we give to the charter schools. And while you don't have the information for the out-of-district tuition, I know that that number is way lower than the 14,000 based on other conversations that we've
It's roughly
had.
1,000. It's a little bit less than 1,000, we think.
So that's about 1,000, right?
Yeah.
So my
I
next
don't want to
question.
I don't want to suggest precision on that, but it's in
Okay,
that zone. Yeah.
approximately.
Yeah.
I'm good with the approximate. So now, the reason why I asked that question is because we have a lot of our charter schools that are sitting in our public schools, and I was told that they should be paying rent, or do they pay rent is my question, and how do we charge them rent? Because to my knowledge, charter schools can get outside resources. So why they're getting so much money from our regular schools, and I'm hearing issues that our schools are falling apart, I'm trying to understand that whole process, because it's not clear to me as to why they're so close in what we allocate to the
So-
charter schools.
I do want to make one point of clarification. I don't think the right comparison is 273 million to 312, because there are a lot of lines that support the Newark Public Schools, the traditional schools, that are separate from the school budgets.
I'm going by the spreadsheet you gave
Yeah,
us. I'm not
I am.
making up the numbers.
Yeah, so what I'm adding a point of clarification. If you look at underneath the 312, you see a number that says 112.5 million. 90% of that's 90% of
Essential
school-based
operations.
and supplies and chalk and books, et cetera, overtime and supplemental pay, equipment at schools, and so on. So anyway, but the larger, and I also believe it is the case that all of the charter schools are, to the extent they are in their own buildings, are in buildings that were formerly NPS buildings, do in fact pay a lease payment. But the most important thing to mention, I think, is that by my calculation, in fact, I was advised yesterday that the state has invested almost $750 million in this district in capital, in building. For example, this building being one example. And by statutory formula, charter schools receive a percentage of the operating budget, but they get no money for capital expenses, for facilities expenses, for lease expenses, for renovation, and so on. So while it is true that some, but by no means all, charter schools raise philanthropic funds to support the building needs that are not covered by the public dollars, I do think it's important to point that out.
Okay, so are they paying rent?
Yes.
Are they paying market value?
No.
So who decides that, since the state is the one that answers everything
Leases that are
else?
in place were negotiated at the time, and that was determined based on the expenses that the district incurs to maintain that building in terms of ownership, because they have taken over the, in the case of solo locations, they take over everything that's associated with the building up to the walls of a building, right? So we don't staff the building. They're expected to keep the building clean. They're expected to cut the grass. They're expected to do everything. Typically for a building we have no mortgage on, we have a cost of insurance and ownership. And those leases were presented to the board at the time.
And when was that?
I think that was 11-12.
Okay, so are we going to revisit that, or is that just like set in stone? Because if we're facing the deficit that we're in, and we have the ability to relook at that, I would suggest that we do.
Well, just very briefly, good evening, everyone. The leases pursuant to any contract have contractual terms in them, and so they were presented. There was a resolution that was submitted. It was during my first beginning time at NPS. It was approximately 3.5 years ago. They're not scheduled to be repositioned to the board because the leases have a term that have not expired at this point in time.
Okay, I asked because I'm new here, and I have these questions, being that as a member of the board right now, we're dealing with these issues. So if someone can get me copies of that, or to let me know when they're due to be looked at again, because 3.5 years ago, times have changed, and we're in a bigger deficit now, so I just want clarity on that if possible.
Okay, we can provide the leases, but again, legally, when you have a contract, you have to abide by the terms of the contract.
I get that.
Okay.
Can all new board members receive the copy of the leases that we have in the district?
By all means.
Because I never received that either.
Madam Chair.
We're happy to share those documents.
There was terms, I know I was one of the board members that showed them leases and I voted against it. There are also terms in the leases that we can, at any time, we could come back and we can revisit them as well.
Thank you, because that's why I'm asking.
Okay, now I have a statement and just a question, and this is on slide number 17. My statement is, it's just very frustrating to hear that the state aid has not gone up, knowing that the student enrollment, is increasing year by year. And it makes me feel disgusted because it looks like the state is out for the district to fail instead of succeed. And with that being said, I just want some clarity on number 3, where it states both charters and NPS per pupil are down, but to prevent charters from going down catastrophically, legislators took additional funds from traditional public schools. My question is, how are the charters going down? How much were the cuts taken from traditional public schools, and how much funds were given to the charter schools?
So my understanding is that the charter schools, as I think I might have mentioned before, were slated to go down at least 15% because of this I think, ill-considered intersection between the funding of not only this district, but all districts. Nobody's picking on Newark. This happened across all 560 districts, and the operation of the charter school formula. It was that intersection that I don't believe was actually, I don't know, I wasn't in the room, but I don't know that people even understood that. That meant that in order to assure that the pain was sort of spread at least equally across all schools, they made a modest adjustment in the funding. That means that charter schools were actually reduced on a per pupil basis at a substantially higher level than the traditional public schools were, but they weren't reduced at a level that they would have been had there not been that adjustment. You know, the amount of that is something that we're still trying to get our arms around. It has been reported to be $25 million. I actually don't think that number is right based on my own analysis, but that's a number we're still trying to get our arms around.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Carter?
Something that I noticed that wasn't mentioned tonight is our 2% reserve fund that we have went into the reserve fund. So I think that is important for the public to know. And I want to know what are the ramifications of that. I think I asked that before. And what is our plan to put that money back in our reserve fund, being that we are legally required to have that 2% reserve fund and we currently do not have it.
You're correct that last year, for the close of the year, and you will receive a presentation on the district's CAFRA in the month of December. Our external auditors are currently working on our financial statements and are reviewing our information at this point in time. We believe, and don't have final numbers, that we may have entered into our 2% fund balance, which is what is, the statute uses the words recommended, but it truly is something that the state wants districts to have. For a district of our size and the size of our budget, that is approximately $17.5 million. In terms of that, once we determine what the actual amount was that was used, that will have to have a plan for replacement. The only way that you're going to be able to replace fund balance is by continually setting aside an amount of money to replace that. So if you ask me my preference, I'd like to take $3.5 million and put it back into fund balance if that's how much I've used, right? But that means that it's $3.5 million less I have to plan for next year's budget, because that's seen, it's not like the state's going to give us money or somebody's going to give us money. We have to replace that money by saving and putting it back.
So do we have a deadline in which we need to replace that money? And if we do not meet that deadline, then what consequences will the district face?
We have not received a deadline. The state has indicated that they would like us to develop a plan for replacement. As you can tell, we've been managing this year's budget, and we're very shortly going into next year's budget. So at some point, you will hear me talk about the replacement of fund balance, either at the close of this current fiscal year or the planning for the new fiscal year.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, and consequences don't really occur until you have depleted your 2%. At that point, the district has no cash.
Okay, how was the money used?
The money was used to offset, as I talked about revenues and expenses at the beginning of the presentation, the money was used to offset expenses that were in excess of what we budgeted.
Can I just mention one other thing that I think is worth the public should understand about the sort of trend lines here? There were two events that, on a sort of one-time basis, substantially increased the revenues to the district. You may recall that when the economy collapsed in 2008, the federal government passed a bill that led to infusion of a very substantial amount of money to cover for the shortfalls in tax revenues. That money caused a big increase in spending in Newark, and then that tapered off and was not replaced. Secondly, I know you recall that several years ago, the Supreme Court of New Jersey ruled in favor of the plaintiffs in the Abbott case and sent an infusion of cash into the district. That happened rather late in the year, so it could not all be spent immediately, but that positively boosted the budget, and again, that was revenue that did not replace itself in the ensuing years. And that's part of the reason for the declining per pupil expenditure, is those revenue sources were effectively one-time infusions of cash that have not repeated themselves.
Thank you very much. Next, we have public participation.
This evening, let me provide you the guidelines for our public participation. Time speakers. Time limits for all speakers will be adhered to. There will be no sharing or granting of speaking time to others. Speakers must be present when their name is called. All speakers will be required to give their names and addresses. The public participation portion of the meeting will be limited this evening to 10 speakers who have signed up at the beginning of the presentation, because this is a special meeting specifically on the budget. Comments and questions are to be directed to the topics discussed this evening. Decorum. Examples of unacceptable behavior that will not be permitted include, but are not limited to, naming district employees and engaging in personal attacks, racial slurs, excessive loudness, calling out, yelling, generally disruptive behavior, attempting to disrupt the meeting, or inciting others to do so. Board member response to public comment. Public participation at board meetings is intended to allow individual members of the public the opportunity to address the board and administration on issues of public concern, and not as a forum for two-way dialogue with board members. The superintendent or designee or the board chair may respond to questions either at the end of the public participation session, or responses may be provided at a later time. Procedures. The State District Superintendent or Advisory Board Chairperson may interrupt any speaker or terminate any individual's speaking privilege if the speaker's comments are disruptive or obscene. An individual may be cautioned that a personally directed statement may be slanderous or defaming, and that the individual may be liable for his or her statements. Attempts to hijack or filibuster the proceedings, repeated interrupting or badgering the board chair or district officials, repetitive and truculent speech, or other disregard for the rules of decorum will not be tolerated and may subject the individual or group to removal from the meeting. If necessary, the advisory board meeting will be adjourned. Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lucius, I thank you very much. You are able to speak right after our last speaker. Now, I request for the individuals that are going to speak to stand up so we could just continue the meeting smoothly. The first person is Ms. Ora Davis. Next, we have Lyndon Brown. After that, Wilhelmina Holder. Then we have Natia Preston. Then we have Floisha Johnson. Then we have Verdi Elliott. And lastly, we have Mr. Lucius Jones.
Let's just call the first.
Ms. Davis?
Yes. Good evening,
Good evening.
President, Superintendent, and all on the dais. My name is Laura Davis. To the President, Mrs. Surf, all on the dais. My name is Laura Davis, 429 South 9th Street, Newark. I listened to all the numbers, and I'm not that astute with everything you said, but I can say this, your budget sounds good, but our children are still in need of what they need in the classrooms. We have an influx of special needs, and I haven't heard anything much about that in your budget. Also, I saw in the budget where you have stipulated money for arts, but for trips you have the museum and Liberty Science Center. That's not enough for the children in public schools. They need more than that for trips. Not only that, you said you had 297 custodians. You have 66 schools. I'm not that good, but if you put 66 in the 297, you have 4 1/3 custodians in the school. We have schools large, and that's not enough, because I go to one school, the gym floor is tearing up. The tile is sticking up on the floor, but it's just as shiny and pretty. Someone could fall and get killed, but get hurt. But it needs more custodians in the school because we have live bugs crawling around things in the school. Maybe the principals don't say anything about it, your CIOs, because most of them are afraid of their jobs. I guess they don't report what should be reported. But those are some of the things that could come to your notice, that things are not being done like they should, and our children still need more in the schools than they have, because you've influxed the classroom with special needs students. They are all students, but special aids are not with these students in the classroom. So I know it's about the budget, but all this is concerning the budget. When you take away the main things that the children need, it slows down education in the classroom, because a teacher cannot teach 25 kids with one making a lot of noise the whole time the class is going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davis. Next, we have Mr. Lyndon Brown. Ms. Holder, Ms. Wilhelmina Holder.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just so disappointed because this budget presentation doesn't give us any information. Board members, I don't know why we're even talking about this. There's nothing in this document that tells me anything that makes sense. I'm not a math major, as Ms. Davis said, but when you say that on slide 9, that the $715 million, I want to know what the equalization aid was, what the special education aid was, what the security aid was, what the transportation aid was, what the park readiness aid was. I need the dollar figures so I can figure out for myself whether you did indeed cut what you said you did. I can figure it out if you cut 5.2% of the budget at the central office cost, but I don't know what that is because you didn't tell me in slide 12, information services, you got 22 people. What are they doing? Who are they and how much money are they earning? This is what budgets do. Human resources, 21. Who are the 21 people? I'm not asking for names, but I need positions and the amount of money we are paying these people. Talent can be combined with human resources if they're certified. And that's another 10 positions. So that's 32 positions between human resources and talent officers, and we don't know what they are. Community specialists, I'm looking at, not community, communications, no, community engagement. 11 people in that office, almost $1 million. What are those positions? And how much are we paying? That's what a budget does. The budget talks about what money comes in. We didn't hear anything about the philanthropic dollars that came in, the private money that came in. We didn't hear anything about the lease payments. How do you not talk about lease payments to charter schools when they're paying us money? That's revenue. I want to know what schools paid what. What did KIPP give us? What did Sacred Heart give us? What did this one give us? What they gave us. That's revenue. That's nowhere in it. That's a budget document, people. Who was on the finance committee? That's a budget document. We don't know how much anything is. This doesn't tell us anything. This tells us what they want us to perceive. They want you to say that they saved this. You know what? I can figure it out for myself if I had the information. How you give me a slide 17 that says the state aid equals this, number of students and the per pupil went down. Well, what is the state aid amount? The number of students divided by, what is that figure? And the per pupil, what is the decrease in fixed costs in the per pupil expenditures? Both charter and NPS, that statement is just criminal to say that the district will support charter school children over traditional public school children, and we're not talking about the $25 million hold harmless that was done. When you say central salary cuts or central budget cuts, are you talking about central at 2 Cedar Street or central to the school? Because the other thing that doesn't really make sense, and I'm really disappointed, board members, in you, in that if the superintendent and Ms. Wilson is talking about budget cuts and vacancies that don't impact student achievement, the question has to be, then what can't the principal not do if they can't fulfill the budget cuts? At Westside, let me give you a prime example where I'm advocating. We need the Gateway College program there so that we can increase student achievement and access for those kids going to college, okay? But we don't have a structure in place with Pathway to College would do that. But because the money was cut, and that is directly impacted by this budget situation, the kids are suffering. And not just at Westside, they're suffering at University where they have large class sizes because the vacancies weren't filled. At Barringer, at Bilingual, I gave you all 6 classrooms that did not have bilingual educators, and that's a budget cut.
Thank you very much, Ms. Holder.
We need answers from you, board members. I want a budget. I'm entitled as a citizen and a taxpayer to get a real budget, not this crap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Holder.
Ms. Holder, in short, let me answer your questions. Number one, the budget was presented at the time that it is statutorily required. It is published on the district's website and has been so since probably April 10th. On that user-friendly budget, you will see the breakdown of all types of aid from the state. Secondly, you should also know that all salaries above $75,000 are posted on the district's website by name, by department, by individual. That information has also been present since April 10th. This meeting is a supplementary meeting to the budget. So there was a legal public budget presentation. In terms of charter leases, in terms of revenue, those are items that are available for public review. The board has received information on that in the past. It is not hidden. It is not kept quiet. And let me be clear that the district did not opt to fund charters over the traditional district. As you well know, 18A 36, which is the charter school law and statute, indicates how districts must pay charters. You will also see how much aid has been attributed to charter schools by the state, because that is part of our public state aid notice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Ms. Natia Preston.
Then we don't get that money back when they don't meet their enrollment.
Ms. Preston.
Hi.
Ms. Holder, thank you very much. Next we have Ms. Natia Preston.
Hi, Natia Preston, 619 Wright Court. I have 2 questions. My first question is it true that NPS received payment for outside the district students to go to Science Park?
Are you asking me if we receive tuition from outside?
Yes, do you receive tuition for children that does not live in a district to attend Science Park? The reason I ask that, because that's what I was told. And how can our neighborhood children attend Science Park without paying? A lot of our neighborhood children do not get into Science Park.
Neighborhood children don't pay to go to Science Park
Right.
or any district school.
My question is, a lot of the neighborhood students are not being allowed to go to Science Park.
So I've heard this concern before, and I think it's a very important concern. So let me tell you how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to work that the Newark Public Schools are reserved for individuals who live in Newark. If an
Right.
individual comes from an adjoining city, for example, he or she, by law, is expected to pay tuition. There are, it has come to my attention, and not never in the form of a proof, but in the form of anecdote, that there are a number of individuals who attend schools in Newark who actually have a domicile, which is the term in the statute, that is outside of Newark. People are using their business address or a former address or whatever. I've heard this from the day I arrived here in July, concentrated mostly in one part of the city, but I've also heard it about Science Park. I will tell you that if that is happening, we would love to have the particulars from you, not here in a public setting, and we will investigate it.
So paying tuition is making a payment to go to the school, correct?
Correct.
All right, so again, how can our neighborhood students that live in the city of Newark attend Science Park?
So science, first of all, can I just ask for a clarification? If you don't know, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Are there out-of-district individuals who are in the Newark Public Schools in science in particular that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. Our tuition, and we just looked at this, which is why I know, tuition is being paid for special needs students who are at Regional Day, JFK, or some of our special needs schools. In our traditional public schools, whether comprehensive or magnet, there are not children that we have been notified of, other than anecdotally, as the superintendent indicated, who are attending the school. Now, should we find a child who would be attending and is from a district somewhere else, we would issue a tuition notice, which would then either have their parents pay the tuition, which I am receiving no tuition for any child in this district, or they would remove their child.
One point that may be implicit in your question, but let me make clear. Science Park is a magnet school, and there is an admissions process that involves essentially an admissions committee that looks at individuals' academic status, their application status, and so on. That's true of science, it's true of arts, and true of several other schools. So it is by design, and long for many years, I think from the outset, has not intended to be a total open enrollment school. It draws from all parts of the city, which I'm sure is a source of frustration if you live right across the street, if one lives in the neighborhood. But that is the nature of a magnet school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ms. Floisha Johnson. Then we have Ms. Elliott.
Excuse me. Good evening. My name is Floisha Johnson. My address is 272 Clinton Place, Newark, New Jersey, 07106. The first question I have is regarding I'm not too sure about the formula funding. How does that work with the charter schools getting only, I think it's 90% that they get, whereas it's 100% funding for a child? How much does a charter student actually get as opposed to a Newark public school student?
Right now, we're looking at the formula, and I don't want to say the exact number, but I think charters get probably about 14,000, and in Newark Public Schools, our per pupil has been calculated, because it's a calculation out of the budget, at about 16,000 per pupil this year.
Okay, so why is it that charter schools get less than regular traditional public school students?
So I'm sorry.
Because their funding comes through the district, and it is the law or statute that they get 90% of the cost per pupil. And that formula, I want everybody to be clear, is calculated at the state level. So while aid comes to the district is told how much it should pay to which charters. So it's not something that I decide as the financial manager for the district. It is decided at the state level based on the charter schools enrollment and based on calculations that are done at the state.
So is the same formula used for traditional public school students? I'm just curious.
So the statute, as Ms. Wilson has elaborated, works as follows. There are a number of appropriations lines in the budget. We've talked about equalization aid. There is something called adjustment aid and extraordinary adjustment aid or special adjustment aid and so on. The statute says that charter schools are to receive 90% of equalization aid. They also get, in a direct relationship with the federal government, their proportionate share of the Title I and the special ed funding called IDEA. They also get the same rights to transportation services that districts get that comes out of a line called transportation. They don't get any support for their I think I said this, for their real estate or their facilities. The district has a rather substantial budget for sort of smallish projects that are a constant issue. But in addition, the capital costs for building a new building such as this one come from a totally separate process called the SDA. And that, so charters do not get the benefit of that kind of funding for facilities.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, we can, I think the net of that is that, that is the law that was passed by the Democratic legislature and signed into law, and it's not something that we've been asked our opinion on. It's something that just is.
Okay, another question for you guys. It was brought to my attention that charter schools pay like administrative fees. I think it's something like $6 million a year or something that we give back. Well, that charter schools give back to Newark Public Schools. Is this true?
No, that's not true. What is true is that at the end of we make a projection at the beginning of the year of how many students will be served by charter schools, and then at the end of the year, if that number is different, there is a truing up process. So, for example, last year we overestimated the expenses that we would pass through the charters and recovered, I believe it was $1.7 million. I think our budget this time, by the way, slightly overestimated the number of charter school students, and we would anticipate some recovery at the end of the year once the numbers settle and are finalized. But there is no general administrative fee paid to the district.
Let me provide one point of clarity as indicated in the statute. The charter school aid is calculated on two forms of the district's aid, the local tax levy and the equalization aid, right? So those are the two pieces of aid that are added together, and then the calculation is done at the state level. The superintendent indicated that there was an overestimation of enrollment. That enrollment number is also provided by the state. So they make the reconciliation at the end of the year and determine how much, if anything, a district is to receive as a reimbursement for payments made.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. Next, we have Ms. Elliott.
Good evening. My name is Verndry Elliott, 47 Webster Street, Newark, New Jersey. And I'm just sort of piggybacking off of what Ms. Felicia Johnson asked concerning funding and equality of funding for all Newark Public School students. The question is, as it concerns the budget cut and funding, is it true that charter schools receive a larger percentage of their budget cut was at a larger rate in terms of, and if so, can that be explained to me why? Because let me let you answer that, please.
So I'm understanding your question to be that if you look at the per pupil, right, how much every school gets per pupil, and you say, and I think we all agree that it went down for everybody. Did it go down a larger percentage for charter schools than it did for? And the answer, to the best of my current knowledge, is it went down a larger percentage than it did for traditional schools. Yes.
And is there a proper explanation, an explanation that was dealt with, that would make us all feel like,
So-
feel better. Why was that done?
So- Having worked in Trenton, here's my hypothesis. The legislative process ultimately ends up in a small room with a handful of people that are trying to get a budget done by, I think it's June 1st, or by the beginning of the summer. When there were sort of competing statutory requirements and budgetary imperatives, they looked up and they said, if we just go forward with what we had planned to do, because, as I said, of the decision to flatline districts and the growing population of charter schools, the intersection of those two things, because of a very complicated formula that I'm only beginning to get my arms around, meant that charter schools would have a very substantial reduction on a per pupil basis. So my guess is they sat around and they said, well, that's too much. We want them to have a reduction, but we don't want it to be such that would essentially crush the life out of charter schools. And they made a budgetary adjustment in that room that I'm asking you to imagine that was not based on, I would say, deep mathematics. It was based on, well, they can tolerate a 3% reduction, but they can't tolerate a 15% reduction. And we don't want the reduction for traditional public schools to be as much as the reduction for charter schools. That is my hypothesis. I wasn't in that room.
So what it seems to me is like charter is being penalized for doing more with less, so to say. I mean, if this is what I surmise
Ms.
from it, is
Elliott,
that
let me remind you, your time has ended. So can you wrap it up?
okay.
But thank you for your question. We appreciate your questions. Thank you. You can go ahead and just wrap it up. Please.
It's one, not in any continuance of an argument of charter versus traditional public. It's about the common denominators, that these are all Newarkers, and that's really just it's clear that it's some unfairness here in terms of, and it just, as a charter parent, we want our equal dollars as well. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Elliott. Next, we have Lucius Jones.
Is this the last one? Oh, my God. Yeah, I'm on it. Me?
All right. Can we start the clock appropriately, please, Madam Chair?
Clock is set appropriately, Mr. Jones.
I just want to begin to say Lucius Jones, 224 Richelieu Terrace, Newark, New Jersey. And I just want to begin by getting my head clear, and that's what I've been doing in the back, trying to clear my head. And I'm glad I didn't miss a lot, because I didn't miss a lot. And I will get a copy of the document that's been circulated, because I haven't gotten an email for that either, but I'm not griping about that. And I just want to simply say that I'm going to call Chris. Chris, I think you're a very smart man. I think you're very intelligent, and I think that you've been traveling the district, and you see the problem. So when we talk about, and I'm going to talk specifically about my nieces and nephews and hundreds and their friends and the community out there of Newark. And we talk about level playing field for all players, level playing field for all kids, whether charter or public. My concern is it really leveled? Are we efficient? Because you're going in schools and they're telling you, like a school like Arts High School don't even have a piano player. No piano player, a school of that magnitude don't even have a piano player. We're going in schools where right now my kids are telling me they're getting D's, or they have substitute teachers. They don't have teachers to teach them chemistry, or they stop the homework club. So we talk about major impact on the child. I mean, my daughter talking about she wants to go to college, and she doesn't even know if she's going to get the GPA high enough to be able to go to out of state, to Harvard or Yale or wherever. You know, so she's talking about Stockton, which I don't have a problem with Stockton. But she's setting her standards low, and that's because of what she's being entertained with. So when I come down to the board, I'm asking the board members to say, you guys voted no. You should be all over this. You should be all over this. But you let them have a meeting in the North Ward in the Boondocks. In the dark. Come on. Y'all should have denied that. We are hurting. Our students, our kids are hurting because of the lack of the quality of education. So when we talk about, and I believe that we can compete. That's the issue, the point. I believe that we can compete with North Star, with Star North, whatever you want to call it. We can compete as a public school because McDonald's can compete with Burger King and Wendy's. No one's denying that we can't compete if we're given a level playing field. So when it comes down to my concern is what is the impact of this year's budget on next year's budget? And how many people or staff members or students will be impacted, because that's when the real numbers are going to come down. That's when we're really going to see what this year's budget did to the students and the staff and the community of Newark Public School when the 2016 budget is created. And I'm trying to say to the commissioner, is the state going to reimburse us for the ignorance of your predecessor? Because you told her she's going too fast. You know you told her she's going too fast, but she said you don't know what you're talking about and called you a bunch of other names. She told the U.S. Secretary of the United States, he told her she's going too fast. So she knew she was going too fast. She was negligent. And the impact is that the weakest of the weak are going to suffer. You know what? I can look back and say, Lucius Jones kids, they can make it. But there are so many foster kids, so many kids with their grandmother, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. And when you look at the high school requirement, they're not going to make it. And so when the board looks and talk about what's great for kids, we have to also look back and say, what's not great for kids? And I think that we dazzle around and run around and try to hide, because that's what I thought about when I was riding here, that we're hiding something. Because you could have had this meeting at Central High School. I'm wrapping it up. I'm very sad and disappointed. Not for me or for you, for Johnny, Susan, and Mary, and Hakeem, and all the kids out there.
Mr. Lucius.
I'm wrapping it up, Madam Chair. They depended on us. Not just you up there, me and everybody else in this city. And we could do better. We can do a lot better than we're doing.
Thank you very much.
Time will tell. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you very much. This concludes public participation. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
I think that was Mr. Jackson on the first.
I'll
Who's
make
the
the
second?
motion. I apologize.
Second, Mr. Salinger, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Good night.